Russian supply locomotive was set on fire by a small number of precise Ukrainian drone strikes, and that single hit may have put far more than one vehicle at risk. On another part of the front near Lyman, Ukrainian UAV teams using thermal cameras were still hunting through the dark, exposing soldiers, vehicles, and temporary shelters that once depended on night for protection. What is now taking shape is a connected pattern in which one strike leads to another. One sighting opens the way for pursuit, and one damaged asset can expose the next weak point behind it. A moving vehicle is hit before troops can deploy. Survivors scatter toward tree lines, dugouts, and abandoned cover. Then the drones keep watching. Antennas, trucks, guns, and support vehicles are found next. Even a railway line that should have helped keep the front alive can suddenly become a trap. That shift matters because the danger is no longer limited to losses counted in men or machines alone. The deeper threat is the slow breakdown of rhythm, movement, and resupply across the battlefield. Once that begins, a force may still have equipment, but lose the ability to use it at the right time and in the right place. The real question is how much room remains to move at all when the rails, the forest edge, the dugout, and even the gray zone are all being watched. A Russian freight locomotive carrying supplies toward the front was spotted by Ukrainian UAV operators on a strategic rail route. Once that target was identified, the attack unfolded with the kind of timing that turns one visible hit into a much larger battlefield problem. What made the scene so striking was the fact that the locomotive did not stop after the first impact. FPV drones came in through successive waves and hit the front section hard enough to set it on fire. Yet the train kept moving for a period of time. That image alone says a great deal about the nature of rail logistics in war. A large platform with weight, momentum, and cargo behind it can continue forward even after serious damage, which means the attack is not always about instant destruction. The locomotive was not just another target on the move. It was the leading point of an entire supply flow. On a road, a damaged truck can sometimes be pushed aside or bypassed. On a rail line, the margin for recovery is much smaller. If the engine is disabled in the wrong place, everything behind it can slow, stop, or pile up into delay. In that sense, the Ukrainian side did not need to destroy every wagon or hit every shipment. It only needed to damage the right node at the right moment and let the structure of the system create the rest of the pressure. The Russian side, of course, may still have cargo, reserve locomotives, repair crews, and supplies farther back on the line. But those assets lose value very quickly if they cannot move when needed. Ammunition that arrives late does not support the unit that needed it an hour earlier. Fuel held behind a blocked stretch of rail does not help vehicles already waiting closer to the line of contact. This is why the strike feels larger than the flames visible around the locomotive. It is not only about what burned. It is about what may now be delayed, stranded, or forced to reroute because one key platform was caught in transit. There is also a deeper tactical message in how the attack appears to have been carried out. Ukraine did not need a massive operation to generate a meaningful result here. The effect came from detection, shadowing, then precise pressure at the point where the target was most exposed. That reflects a wider shift in battlefield logic. A side under strain does not always have to smash the whole rear network. It can focus on a single moving link and turn that link into a choke point. That approach is cheaper, faster, and often more disruptive than trying to strike everywhere at once. For Russia, this creates an uncomfortable dilemma. Protecting rail logistics means guarding not only the cargo, but also the route, the timing, and the front asset that pulls the entire chain forward. Yet the more heavily protected a movement becomes, the more predictable it can also become. A train follows track, not instinct. It cannot scatter into tree lines, change lanes, or vanish into terrain. Once seen, its path is largely fixed. That gives the attacker a kind of discipline by force, because the target is moving but still confined. Night operations around Lyman are no longer about hiding in darkness, but about surviving under constant observation. Ukrainian drone teams have turned the night into a space where heat becomes a signal. and once that signal appears, it can be tracked from the moment of movement to the moment of impact. In this sector, units such as Signum deploy FPV equipped with thermal cameras that scan wide areas without pause. These systems do not rely on visible light, so trees, shadows, and terrain that once provided cover now lose much of their value. A soldier moving between positions, an engine warming up before a push, even a small group resting in a shallow trench can stand out clearly against the colder background. What used to be a safe window for movement has become a period of exposure. This shift changes how both sides approach the battlefield after sunset. Russian forces still attempt to move under low light conditions, using reduced signatures, slower pacing, and dispersed formations to avoid attention. Some units rely on thermal cloaks or improvised methods to limit heat leakage. Others try to stay still for long periods, hoping that lack of movement will prevent detection. These adjustments show an awareness of the threat, yet they do not remove it. Ukrainian operators answer this with persistence rather than speed alone. A drone does not need to strike immediately once a target appears. It can circle, maintain distance, and wait until a pattern becomes clear. When a group pauses, gathers, or shifts position in a predictable way, that is when a second FPV can move in for the attack. This creates a layered process where observation leads to timing, and timing leads to precision. The result is not a single sudden strike, but a controlled sequence that reduces the chance of escape. The most important change here is not the technology itself, but how it is used over time. Continuous scanning means that even if a unit avoids detection in one moment, it may still be found minutes later when conditions change. A soldier who feels safe after reaching cover may still be inside the field of view of a drone that never left the area. This turns short movements into extended risks, because the threat does not disappear when the first danger seems to pass. This also affects decision-making on the ground. Russian commanders must weigh the need to move against the likelihood of being seen. Delaying action can reduce exposure, but it can also slow down operations and create gaps elsewhere. Moving quickly may help avoid a fixed observation point, yet it increases the chance of leaving a clear thermal trail. There is no simple answer, which means each choice carries its own cost. What stands out in Lyman is that the contest is no longer only about firepower or numbers. It is about which side can manage visibility better over time. Russia tries to reduce its signature and limit exposure, while Ukraine works to extend its sight and keep targets within view for as long as possible. That interaction defines the rhythm of the fight at night. So the key question becomes harder to ignore. If darkness no longer guarantees safety, then what remains as a reliable moment to move, regroup, or prepare an assault? And if every source of heat can become a marker, does night still offer an advantage, or has it quietly turned into a trap for those who depend on it? Small assault groups are now being stopped before they can even become a real attack, and what follows is no longer a simple strike, but a controlled hunt that unfolds step by step. Russian units in this sector are using motorcycles and lightly armored MTLB vehicles to move fast, exploit gaps, and avoid the heavy losses that larger formations often face. But speed alone is no longer enough to cross the approach zone. These movements begin with intent and coordination, yet they are often detected early by Ukrainian aerial surveillance. Once a column or a small group enters open ground or moves between thin tree lines, it is picked up and tracked in real time. A single FPV drone can close the distance quickly and strike the lead vehicle before troops even have time to dismount. When that happens, the entire push changes direction within seconds. The first impact does not end the action. It starts a second phase that is far more dangerous for those who survive. Soldiers abandon damaged vehicles and scatter into nearby terrain, breaking into smaller elements and moving toward what looks like cover. Tree lines, shell craters, shallow trenches, and abandoned dugouts become immediate destinations. And at first glance, this seems like a natural response that could preserve lives. What follows reveals how the battlefield has shifted. A reconnaissance drone remains overhead and keeps the entire area under watch, while attack drones do not rush to finish every target at once. Instead, they hold distance and observe how the scattered groups behave. Movement patterns begin to form. Some individuals cluster together, others move alone, and a few try to reach deeper positions. Each decision creates a visible path that can be followed. This is where timing becomes more important than speed. Once those patterns are clear, FPV units return in sequence and strike one position after another. A dugout that looked safe minutes earlier becomes a marked point. A soldier who paused to recover is suddenly exposed again. The area that once served as an escape route turns into a controlled space where each location can be revisited and cleared. The engagement no longer looks like a single clash between two sides. It becomes a layered process in which detection leads to disruption, disruption leads to dispersion, and dispersion leads to targeted elimination. The initial hit on a vehicle is only the opening move. The real damage comes from what happens after, when survivors believe they have created distance from the threat. This creates a psychological effect that is just as important as the physical outcome. When a unit realizes that leaving a vehicle does not remove danger and that every new position may already be under observation, decision-making becomes slower and less confident. Movement is delayed, coordination weakens, and the ability to regroup declines over time. At the same time, the attacking side does not need to increase force size to maintain pressure. It only needs to maintain presence in the air and apply strikes at the right moment. This reduces the need for large engagements and replaces them with repeated small actions that accumulate into a larger result. So the most dangerous moment is not when the vehicle is hit. It is the moment after, when those who survive believe they have found safety. That belief creates the pause, and that pause is exactly what allows the next strike to land with even greater effect. The battlefield is reaching a point where there is almost no reliable place left to hide once movement has been exposed. After small units are broken apart and forced to scatter, the next question becomes immediate and critical. Where can they go that is not already under watch? At first, the answer still looks familiar. Soldiers move toward dugouts in the forest, temporary shelters built from wood and soil, abandoned buildings, or old fighting positions that were left behind during earlier phases of combat. These locations are chosen because they offer cover from direct fire and some level of concealment from the ground. In a traditional fight, reaching such a place could mean survival, at least for a period of time. That assumption is now being tested in real time. Ukrainian FPV do not leave the area once the first strike is complete. They remain overhead, scanning, adjusting position, and passing information between units. A shelter that appears hidden from ground view can still be detected from above, especially when multiple drones observe the same area from different angles. Once a position is marked, it can be revisited and engaged with precision. This changes the meaning of cover. A dugout is no longer a stable solution. It becomes a temporary pause between strikes. A damaged structure does not need to be destroyed in a single hit. It can be hit again after a delay, once movement is confirmed inside. The same pattern applies to small buildings and improvised shelters. Each location that once served as protection can now become a fixed point that draws attention rather than deflects it. The situation becomes even more complex in areas like Sloviansk, where Russian forces attempt to use the gray zone as a staging space. Small groups move forward, guided by their own drones, and try to occupy gaps between Ukrainian positions. The goal is to hold ground quietly, wait for orders, and expand control without triggering a larger response. This method depends on remaining unnoticed for as long as possible. That condition is becoming harder to maintain. The gray zone is no longer a space of uncertainty. It is increasingly a monitored environment where movement, even at small scale, can be detected over time. A group that reaches a trench or a shallow pit may avoid immediate contact, but it does not disappear. It stays within the field of view of drones that continue to search for changes, signals, and patterns. This creates a direct interaction between two evolving approaches. Russian units respond by reducing group size, limiting communication, and spreading out across wider areas to lower visibility. Ukrainian forces answer by increasing drone presence, overlapping observation zones, and coordinating between reconnaissance and strike elements. Smaller targets become harder to see in a single moment, but easier to track when watched continuously. As a result, the concept of safe space is shrinking. It is no longer defined by terrain alone, but by time and attention. A location may be safe for a short window, then become dangerous once it is observed long enough. The risk does not come only from entering a position, but from staying in it too long. This is why the pressure keeps building even after the initial clash has ended. Survivors who reach cover are not removed from the fight. They remain inside a system that is still tracking them. Every pause, every regrouping effort, and every attempt to wait out the danger can turn into a new point of vulnerability. So the battlefield question becomes sharper with each phase. If dugouts, shelters, and gray zones can all be found and revisited, what actually counts as concealment anymore? And which factor matters more in this new environment? Is it the speed of detection, the accuracy of the strike, or the ability to follow a target long enough to finish the job? The pattern of strikes is expanding beyond soldiers and vehicles, and it is now focused on breaking the system that keeps everything moving. What appears on the surface as separate hits is actually a sequence aimed at removing the support layers that allow units to fight, communicate, and sustain pressure over time. The targets in this phase are more varied and more precise. Air defense systems such as Tor are located and engaged after being detected through their activity. Artillery pieces are followed from the moment they are moved into position, and once they fire or relocate, they are tracked and struck before they can settle again. Supply trucks moving between points are intercepted on the road, often before reaching their destination. Each of these actions removes a specific function from the battlefield rather than just adding another destroyed asset. One of the most revealing developments is how communication nodes are being targeted. Antennas placed deep inside the forest or hidden behind walls are identified through signal patterns and visual cues. A drone can approach at the right angle and enter through a window, then detonate directly next to the equipment. The strike does not need to destroy the entire structure. It only needs to silence the system that connects units on the ground. Once that connection is lost, coordination weakens and response time increases. This method shows a clear shift in intent. The goal is not to create the largest visible damage in a single moment. The goal is to remove the pieces that allow a force to operate as a connected whole. When a communication point is lost, units rely on slower or less reliable methods. When a transport vehicle is destroyed, supplies arrive later or not at all. When artillery is neutralized, fire support becomes limited. When air defense is reduced, the sky becomes more open for further strikes. The interaction between the two sides becomes more complex at this stage. Russian units try to adapt by hiding key assets inside structures, dispersing equipment, and reducing emissions to avoid detection. These actions can lower immediate visibility, but they also introduce new constraints. Hiding systems inside buildings limits their mobility. Reducing signals can slow communication. Dispersing assets makes coordination harder. Each adjustment solves one problem while creating another. Ukraine responds by increasing the depth of observation and tightening the timing of strikes. A target is not only found, but also monitored until the right moment appears. A vehicle that moves may be ignored at first, then struck when it reaches a more vulnerable point. A radar system may remain active for a short period, then become exposed through its own emissions. The attack is delayed until the chance of success is higher. This creates a battlefield where every function becomes a potential target. Movement, communication, fire support, and protection are all linked, and each link can be isolated and attacked. The result is not a sudden collapse, but a gradual reduction in capability. Units may still exist in place, but their ability to act together becomes weaker with each loss. At this point, the story is no longer about individual clashes. It becomes about how a network is being taken apart piece by piece. From the front line to the areas behind it, signals, vehicles, and support systems are all being turned into separate objectives. So the question becomes more pointed as the pattern continues. Which type of strike creates the most pressure over time? Is it the one that removes people from the field, the one that destroys equipment in motion, or the one that quietly breaks the connections that hold everything together? What burned in this story was not only a locomotive at the front of a supply line. What burned with it may have been part of an older idea of how movement, cover, and survival still work on this battlefield. From the rail line to the tree line, from night movement to scattered troops hiding in dugouts and abandoned shelters, the same pattern kept returning. Ukraine appears to be linking surveillance, tracking, disruption, and follow-up strikes into one continuous cycle. That cycle matters because once it becomes fast enough, the damage spreads beyond the first impact point. A motorcycle group stopped early can turn into a trapped infantry cluster. A shelter that once meant safety can become the next marked location. Russia will almost certainly keep adapting. More concealment, more dispersal, more short-range protection, and more effort to reduce visible movement are all likely to follow. But the deeper question is whether those adjustments can happen fast enough when drones are becoming more present, more patient, and more precise across a wider area. Is this already the new shape of modern war? Or is this only the beginning of a far harsher version still forming in front of us? If this report was useful, please like, share, and subscribe to Military Force. And in the comments, say which matters more in the next stage of this war: firepower, mobility, or the ability to see and strike first.